tonight.
Our creators endowed us with the right to life.
The highest court in America takes on a controversial Texas abortion law, the latest from the Supreme Court.
Are you guys ready to win or what? Right now, we have a big lead in the early vote.
And election eve in Virginia, the final push ahead of the closely watched governor's race in the Commonwealth. Plus, how frontline workers are turning to faith to help them overcome the trials brought by the pandemic. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A conservative-leaning Supreme Court takes on a controversial abortion ban. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The Supreme Court today taking up two challenges to the nation's most restrictive abortion law. Known as SB 8, or the Texas Heartbeat Act, the measure has brought most abortions to an abrupt halt in the Lone Star State.
That's right. The law bans abortions once cardiac activity is detected, which is usually around 6 weeks. CBN's Caitlin Burke has been following today's oral arguments and joins us from the Supreme Court for tonight's top story. Caitlin?
Today, the High Court heard two challenges to SB 8. The first from lawyers representing abortion rights advocates. The second from the U.S. Justice Department. Both focus specifically on how Texas lawmakers transferred enforcement of the law from state officials to private citizens.
Texas delegated enforcement to literally any person anywhere except its own state officials. The only conceivable reason for doing so was to evade federal court review.
Attorney Mark Herron, representing abortion providers, argued allowing the law to stand would provide a roadmap to nullify other constitutional rights. Newly appointed U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogger called it an attack on the authority of the High Court.
States are free to ask this court to reconsider its constitutional precedents, but they are not free to place themselves above this court, nullify the court's decisions in their borders, and block the judicial review necessary to vindicate federal rights.
What exact relief are you requesting?
So we would be requesting an injunction against the commencement or the docketing of lawsuits against the clerks across the state of Texas, as well as injunctive relief against the state executive officials for their residual authority to enforce SB 8.
Texas Solicitor General Judd Stone said that would be pointless.
Petitioners' Article 3 inequitable problems begin with what they really want, an injunction against SB 8, the law itself. They can't receive that because federal courts don't issue injunctions against laws, but against officials enforcing laws. No Texas executive official enforces SB 8 either, and so no Texas executive official may be enjoined.
But Prelogger says an injunction against Texas itself would bind state judges.
It's unprecedented, and it is contrary to our system of federalism to enjoin a state judge even from hearing a case. When has that been done, and how can that be justified? The judge is a neutral arbiter.
And I'm asking you, counsel, are you aware of any other example of such an injunction?
In the history of the United States, no state has done what Texas has done here.
Stone says the federal government cannot claim a sovereign interest in this case unless authorized by Congress. Justice Kavanaugh questioned the Texas solicitor on the implications of the law on other constitutional rights.
It could be free speech rights, it could be free exercise of religion rights, it could be Second Amendment rights. If this position is accepted here, the theory of the amicus brief is that it can be easily replicated in other states that disfavor other constitutional rights.
Stone says it's the job of Congress to step in to pass legislation protecting specific rights from being suppressed by this type of lawsuit. Meanwhile, Texas Governor Greg Abbott recently spoke with Focus on the Family about SB 8, saying the enforcement mechanism used has been used many times before.
It's called a qui tam lawsuit, where it provides third parties the enforcement power. It's used in Medicaid and Medicare claims. It's used in any type of False Claims Act against the federal government. And so it just imported into the enforcement mechanism a strategy that's been used for well over a century in the United States.
The Supreme Court is expected by the end of the year. And just a reminder, this case does not challenge Roe versus Wade, but the Supreme Court is hearing a case in December that challenges a Mississippi law banning most abortions after 15 weeks. And the attorneys for the state have explicitly asked the High Court to overturn Roe. John and Jenna, back to you.
Abortion playing prominently in the Supreme Court term. Thank you so much, Caitlin. For more now, we're joined by Kimberly Schwartz with Texas Right to Life. Kimberly, thanks for joining us. In today's Supreme Court session, we heard a lot of technical legal arguments. What was your biggest takeaway, Kimberly, from today's hearing?
The most important thing to know from today's hearing is that the justices are asking whether these lawsuits are valid in the first place. Now, you might think that's a really low bar for these judges to actually consider. Why would that be a victory? These questions are what the district court ignored. That liberal judge that blocked the Texas Heartbeat Act at the beginning of October, it was very obvious that he had already reached his conclusion that abortion is a constitutional right no matter what. And it doesn't matter what the question is or what actual precedent is. And so because the judge ignored that in the first place, we didn't get a fair shake at the trial level. So now going up to the Supreme Court, the justices are considering whether these are actual viable vehicles to accomplish what the abortionists and the Department of Justice are trying to do.
Back in September, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court refused to block the Texas abortion law in a 5-4 majority decision. Kim, many today were watching to see if any of those 5 judges might have been swayed. Did you hear anything that you thought might change their minds of, say, Justice Brett Kavanaugh or Justice Amy Coney Barrett?
We are optimistic that we're going to have the majority here in this case, that they're not going to enjoin the Texas Heartbeat Act from being enforced. So we believe and we hope that the majority is going to be preserved there. And just like you said, we had the optimistic sign at the beginning of September, the Supreme Court allowing the Texas Heartbeat Act to take effect in the first place with this exact same lawsuit, Whole Woman's Health v. Jackson. Now, we do have a different set of circumstances between the beginning of September and now, but we still believe that these lawsuits at the end of the day are invalid. And so we hope that the Supreme Court will agree and see that.
In the lead up to the arguments, Kimberly, today, abortions have pretty much come to a halt there in Texas. What has that meant for the pro-life fight there? And what about the effect on neighboring states that have seen demand skyrocket?
We're so encouraged by the number of lives saved by the Texas Heartbeat Act. We estimate that about 100 babies per day are saved from abortion because of this law. And that's about a school bus full of children every single day. And every day that the law is in effect is a victory for us. Now, it is true that some women are seeking abortions earlier in pregnancy than they would have otherwise. And it's true that some women are tragically going to other states to have abortions. But it's also true we've seen a huge surge in the number of women coming to pro-life pregnancy centers to receive help. And so I encourage anybody who might be listening to volunteer at a local pregnancy center because the demand has just skyrocketed. And so any volunteers that can lend a hand are more than welcome. You can go to our website, texasrighttolife.com, to find out where.
All right, Kimberly Schwartz with the Texas Right to Life. Great to have you on with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it is election eve in Virginia, and the race for governor is extremely tight. At the 11th hour, most polls show a dead heat between Republican Glenn Youngkin and Democrat Terry McAuliffe. Youngkin, a political newcomer and businessman, casts himself as an outsider with a focus on the economy and education. He's vowing to stand up for parents alarmed about school curriculums and pledging to ban what critics call critical race theory.
We will teach all history, but what we will not do, we will not teach our children to view everything through a lens of race and divide them into baskets and then make them compete against one another and steal dreams.
McAuliffe, who won his first Virginia gubernatorial term in 2013, has largely focused on fighting COVID, vaccine mandates, and tying Youngkin's agenda to former President Trump. Analysts note McAuliffe's slipping lead, which comes at the same time President Biden's approval rating has fallen.
Right now, we have a big lead in the early vote.
Polls show Youngkin has the advantage with the all-important independent voters and also leads in the enthusiasm gap over McAuliffe's campaign.
And joining us now, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and editor and publisher of Inside Elections, Nathan Gonzalez. Gentlemen, welcome. Nathan, to you first. Glenn Youngkin, it looks like he has momentum heading into tomorrow. What is behind that surge, and what's really animating voters this cycle?
Yeah, well, I think the race is a toss-up. I think almost everyone agrees, no matter if you're talking to Republicans or Democrats, that this race is likely to be close, and that means that every vote matters. I think what this is this is a test to see whether Republicans can get back some of the ground that they lost either in 2020 and 2018, because Biden won Virginia by 10 points, but yet Youngkin is within striking distance and maybe even has a slight advantage. Part of that is, I think, being able to boost Republican turnout, but also being able to get back some independent voters who maybe aren't satisfied with Democratic leadership, whether that's Democratic leadership in Virginia or in the White House or in Congress, and they're ready to have their voice heard.
David, to you, former President Donald Trump has a tele-rally for Youngkin today. He also issued a statement earlier in the day contradicting the media's portrayal that the two men are at odds, saying, "We get along very well and strongly believe in many of the same policies." He also questioned, though, the integrity of Virginia's elections. David, Terry McAuliffe tried to tie Youngkin to Donald Trump all along. Does this help or hurt the GOP's efforts to win back the governor's mansion?
Well, John, I mean, not to cop out on the answer, I think it's unclear at this point. I think it would be interesting to see how many voters who are undecided come in at the last moment and how that breaks for both McAuliffe and Youngkin. But you know, what's interesting is the reason McAuliffe has probably had some hard time tying Youngkin to Trump is because Trump has pretty much been away from the Virginia race. He hasn't really weighed in. There's been no rallies. There's been no Youngkin-Trump solidarity at all. And now, of course, you got this telephone. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's a telephone. Donald Trump on the telephone? Look, he'd prefer to do something in person if the candidate was full throttle for him. Youngkin really hasn't been full throttle for Trump. And that's why there's not this one big rally in front of the television camera, which was the last time I checked. Donald Trump loves the television cameras, but he's not doing that. Why? Because there has been this kind of like standoffish between the two guys. And that's why I think McAuliffe is having a hard time doing the typical playbook, which is to tie Youngkin to Trump.
Yeah. Youngkin, trying to walk the line very, very carefully and not turn off the Trump base while also reaching out to, the suburban women and more, middle of the road voters. Nathan, the media likes to characterize Virginia as a bellwether for the midterms. How accurate is that? And is Virginia a good representative of the rest of the country?
Well, looking back over multiple cycles, sometimes this governor's race is, and sometimes it's not a window into the midterm elections. But I would say that even if Youngkin comes up a little bit short, I think it's good news for Republicans. Again, we're talking about a place where Biden won comfortably that's now very competitive. I think that Youngkin's strategy will be used as a blueprint by Republican candidates in districts and states around the country, and that blueprint being trying to walk the line between keeping all of former President Trump's supporters in the coalition, but also reaching out to people who voted against President Trump. And so, again, the good news for Republicans is that in order to win back the House and win back the Senate, they don't need to win places that voted as Democratic as Virginia. There are more competitive places they can get to those majorities.
David, in a matter of just a few months, the president's approval rating has basically inverted. I think we have a full screen graphic to show you. 42% of Americans approve, while 54% disapprove, according to a new NBC News poll. 6 months ago, he had a 53% approval rating. David, how much of a factor will that be for voters tomorrow and farther down the line in next year's midterm elections?
I think it's a factor. I mean, I guess I shouldn't quote karma on Faith Nation because I don't believe in karma. This just in. But there is kind of a political karma, if you will, when it comes to the fact that Biden is tanking in the numbers. McAuliffe is not doing well. As Nathan said, Virginia, a blue state, that Biden won by 10. It just, and now it's too close to call. I mean, the whole thing just feels like it's just not working for Democrats. And I think that, when, there was a book by Drew Weston a professor at Emory University called The Politics of Emoting, and that people vote with their heart, not necessarily with their brain.
Right.
And I think part of this is what we're seeing here, is that you get a sense of what's happening on the ground. You always want to back a winner, and the momentum seems to be with Youngkin, and I think that's a big part of it. So in terms of Biden's approval numbers, I think it's part of it. I don't think it's the whole thing.
All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. It's great to see you both. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Climate change on the world stage. Coming up, the latest as leaders from around the globe come together to spotlight the issue.
Well, welcome back. A warning from world leaders tonight, many imploring this could be the beginning of the end if we do not reduce carbon emissions immediately. That's the prevailing message of the COP26 Climate Crisis Summit taking place in Scotland this week.
Right now, we're still falling short. There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it.
World leaders from more than 100 countries, including President Biden, used apocalyptic language to describe the fate of our planet if countries don't speed up on a commitment to keep temperatures from rising and reduce coal consumption.
Democratic leadership in the House is signaling they may finally vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the $1.75 trillion social spending package this week. Progressive and centrist Democrats appearing to be close to reaching a deal on the text of that larger bill. But before progressives lend their support to the infrastructure bill, they want firm commitments from Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema that they will vote for the larger spending bill, something they still haven't received. Today, Senator Manchin said it's time for a vote on infrastructure and that, quote, holding this bill hostage is not going to work in getting his support for the social spending package. And we'll be right back with more Faith Nation after this. A staggering new figure tonight in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Global COVID-19 related deaths have hit 5 million.
With that overwhelming exhaustion, deep-seated grief, and even fear, frontline healthcare workers have borne the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic.
So how do they keep on keeping on? The CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson found out firsthand.
Throughout the country, healthcare workers of faith who have braved the front lines of this pandemic for more than a year and a half share a special bond.
I ask you to undergird them with strength.
Shift change at Virginia's Centera Lee Hospital, much needed prayer for workers coming and going.
COVID really took a toll on the staff here at the hospital. Exhaustion, being overwhelmed, and not sure how to navigate this, and also deal with their own fears of maybe catching the disease and fearful of taking it home to their family and their loved ones, but still having the heart to do what they've been drawn to provide the care that others need.
Since the pandemic hit, hospital chaplains now minister to employees as much as patients and their families.
There was one incident in particular in the ICU. There was a young man who passed away from COVID, and it affected the whole staff. And so I was asked to come up the next morning and have prayer with the nursing staff, the physicians in the ICU, as well as the NCP staff. The whole staff stopped for a while for a time of prayer.
Many healthcare workers tell me the most trying task is serving as a go-between for the patient and their family members not allowed in the hospital.
He was unable to talk, so he blinked his eyes. I said that the Lord is with you and he will not leave you. So at that moment, I called his mother and put her on speaker. I said, I know you know your son can't talk, but he's blinking his eyes and he hears your voice. She said, I love you.
Life on the front lines has been nonstop, and the pandemic caused many workers to quit, leaving those behind to pick up the slack.
I often work extra hours because I care about my patients and families. So therefore, it was nonstop for me. So my family began to get worried and said, you need to rest. But I told them I must go on. And I can truly say that the Lord has kept my health. He has kept me.
Now more than ever, healthcare workers of faith, and there are a lot of them, stand on the promises of God.
When I'm scared or worried or don't know what to do, I just go back to the scripture
knowing that God is here with us always, and that with Him nothing is impossible.
In one of the hardest hit areas of Texas, Dr. Craig DeLisi says he's seen 10 times the deaths during the pandemic than in his entire 20 years of practice.
There's been a lot of tears, a lot of drives home with tears from the hospital.
Over time, what makes him cry has changed.
In the very beginning, I think what was hard was the unknown and seeing so much fear all around us. But at that point, at least I think people were still looking to the medical profession, and they sought our advice. They, kind of followed counsel.
Later, however, he says many people stopped listening when it came to recommendations like getting vaccinated.
To me, every patient, I've lost several in the last month, and to me, every one of those felt preventable. And I understand as a believer that, in God's sovereignty and the big picture, their days were numbered. He knew when their last breath would be, but it's harder, I think, to watch suffering and death when it feels preventable.
Still, he believes God will use this pandemic for good.
And I hope that the fruit of this pandemic will be repentance and will be humility and will be people turning to Him.
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Hitting the slopes. Still ahead, it's officially ski season in some parts. We'll show you where. Finally tonight, around much of the country, it feels like fall, but in part of California, winter weather has already made its arrival.
For residents of Tahoe or people traveling there, that means one thing: ski season.
Getting outside, getting active, it just makes you more happy. And when you're doing something you love, like skiing, it makes you even more happy.
I'm feeling super psyched, and I'm just ready to go ski.
And I'm feeling super jealous. Over the weekend, for only the third time in the last 72 years, the Palisades Tahoe Resort opened its slopes in October. Excited skiers and snowboarders, I can't talk right now, I'm so excited, turned out to take on some early season runs. Those slopes didn't open until 9 o'clock in the morning. Lines started forming, Jenna, get this, around 6 o'clock in the morning. I know you just got back from Colorado. Were the ski slopes open there?
Not quite, but there's definitely snow up where my parents live in the high country. It's beautiful.
Sounds like
fall colors and snow.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.